When Yugioh almost died. This is a good topic to start with. The end! Like any property, Yugioh has gone through peaks and valleys. For every YCS with record high attendance, there's one with record low attendance. It's not immune to the same thing that plagues all hobbies. But when Yugioh is in a down period, you feel it. Other TCGs have alternate formats you can switch to if the main one isn't to your liking. But with Yu-Gi-Oh! Only recently embracing alt formats, and not near to the level that, say, Magic supports Draft or Commander, you kinda just have to suffer. Yu-Gi-Oh! Players are a resilient bunch. We've survived multiple worst formats of all times, and the player base has largely remained unchanged. The only time there was a noticeable flux is when new summoning mechanics are introduced, and the Yugi Boomer generation moves up one. There are 2 years, though, 2 of the worst years in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, where thanks to the degradation of the game and improvement of other options, it could be said that Yu-Gi-Oh was close to losing its spot in the top 3 card games. The lesser of these, but still a terrible time for the game, was 2018. 2018 was near the tail end of the Link era, right before the era's first good format in Toss. The Link era was meant to slow the game down by introducing Link monsters that would mean that decks could no longer spam loads of extra deck monsters that put up a million negates that made for unfun one-sided games. The problem is that not only did Lynx not accomplish this by way of making Link monsters who could also put up a million negates, it actually had the opposite effect, as Link monsters having insanely generic materials meant that vomiting out a million guys got you an insanely strong board of generic Links. The biggest culprit for why this era sucked so much is getting his own entry later on, but there were so many monsters that you would hate to see. Isold, Summon Sork, every single nightmare, and especially Topologic Gumblar Dragon. If not for Toss, Link would have easily been the worst era of Yu-Gi-Oh! Overall, even beating out historically ass eras like GX. Decks in mid-2018 came in 2 variants, either hand loops using Gumblar and the Dark World monsters, or FTKs. Gem Knight existed as an FTK deck, and wasn't stopped because it wasn't even the best FTK deck. There were decks like Danger with multiple FTK variants. You could play Cannon Soldier. You could play Slash Draw. You could even beat a child. At the London 2018 YCS, Yu-Gi-Oh! World Champion Jesse Cotton used a Danger Dark World deck against a child. Not a young player, an 11-year-old little boy. How these two could have possibly been matched up together is a mystery, but it makes for the most uncomfortable and embarrassing Yu-Gi-Oh! Game of all time, as the announcers desperately try to make it seem like this isn't the worst game in the world. Like, based on the cards the kid is using, it's obvious he just got a structure deck, opened some packs, threw it together, put it in a sandwich bag, and brought it to the YCS. And now he's staring down the worst deck in the format. So, what could you be playing if you didn't want to hand loop or FTK your opponent? Oh! 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 Wow, forthright! I had rejoined Yu-Gi-Oh! During the Link era, after exiting at the beginning of the Xyz era, and just pretending pendulums didn't happen, so I got to witness this format firsthand. And now having lived through the next 7 years of the game's history, for as bad as you think Kashtira, or Snake Eye, or Malice Ryziel formats were, mid to late 2018 was worse. As I joined the community, tons of people left. So sorry. There was a format before this, one that was even worse, and came at the worst possible time. 2012 was a shaky time for Yu-Gi-Oh! Xyz, despite being easier to wrap your head around than Synchros, since you just had to recognize the number of stars like a preschool assignment, was not popular among the fanbase. They either didn't like it because new thing bad, or because of 3 decks that nearly killed the game. Insector, a powerful insect deck that plowed through boards and gained insane advantage with Insector, Dragonfly, and Hornet. Wind-Up, which had the insane gimmick of every card being a soft once per turn. And Dino Rabbit, a deck that used the newly released Rescue Rabbit to convert two normal dinosaurs into the powerful Evilzar, Logia, and Dolka. These three decks were all that was worth playing. The only thing that kept them in check was each other, and anything daring to step into their realm was chewed up and spat back out. The problem, though, was that these three decks sucked. They were good, but they were boring. Either you watched Hornet hop back and forth from grave to field as your own field was picked apart card by card, watched Wind-Up steal your entire hand with Wind-Up Hunter, or watched Rescue Rabbit hit the field and then sighed. And to actually play this boring game of Yu-Gi-Oh, you were shelling out a lot of money. All three of these decks had major price cards. Even Dino Rabbit, which used normal monsters, had expensive cards. Sabersaurus was about a $10 card. It's a normal monster, it doesn't do anything! This was a dire format, and Konami had the chance to adjust it and fix the problems players had. Sure, a lot of the cards were from newer sets like Order of Chaos and Photon Shockwave, but this couldn't be allowed to fester. The ban list came around in March of 2012, and the decks hit were Plant Synchro and Agents. Two decks that by this point were completely rotated out, and were now dead for no reason. Worse yet, this was a uniquely bad ban list, since it included, for the first time, reasons as to why cards were limited. See, unlike most other card games where ban lists come with reasonings as to why the cards were hit and what they want the format to be, Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't do that, except for this March 2012 ban list. And when we saw what was banned, and more importantly, what wasn't banned, the message couldn't come through any clearer. Konami was not gonna change anything. People had had enough. They started looking for other games to play. And at the worst time possible for Konami, Card Fight Vanguard started and soaked up that lost player base. There's a direct correlation between the fall in Yu-Gi-Oh! Players during Wind-Up format and the rise in players at the beginning of Card Fight Vanguard's life. Even more than the exodus during 2018, this was the closest Yu-Gi-Oh! Ever came to death. Attendance at events was at an all-time low. Products were selling slower than ever, and a new competitor was coming in and nipping at their heels. It was grim. Will the formats we're suffering through right now ever reach these lofty depths? We can only pray not. Free Stratos. The Yu-Gi-Oh! Ban list is supposed to be a force for good in the game. Sometimes cards are either born broken, or get broken when new cards come out that work with them in unintended ways, that the only way to preserve the player base is to get them out. As we just saw though, the ban list doesn't always do its job. Whether that's by a new card being too new to get out of the format, or Konami ignoring it on purpose, it doesn't always work the way it's supposed to. Out of all the cards who have ever served a tour of duty on the ban list, though, there's one that surpasses them all. Both in terms of its length and its audacity. Elemental Hero, Stratos. Stratos is a wind warrior monster who belongs to the hero archetype, who on top of a pretty good back row destruction effect, has the ability to grab any hero monster from your deck when it's summoned. That's Elemental, Destiny, Evil, Masked, Vision. Grab Entertainment Hero Pit Boss, who cares? Stratos' effect to search on summon was a breakthrough in Yu-Gi-Oh! As big an effect as Cyber Dragon being able to summon itself, or the gadgets replacing themselves when summoned. Stratos ushered in a new era with his introduction, where any monster that searched on summon was now called a Stratos. The value of Stratos was understood instantly, especially since he was born with a bounty on his head. See, Stratos was immediately clocked as the best hero card, and as such is one of a very small pool of cards to be released on the ban list. In America, Stratos was put on the limited list the same day he was released on April 21st, 2007, when he was released as a Shonen Jump promo card. Even at one copy, Stratos was still a powerhouse. Either great to see in your opening hand, or mana from heaven if you drew him off the top. In every hero variant he was alive to see, like Gemini Heroes, Bubble Beat, Little City, Diva Heroes, Omni Heroes, Xyz Heroes, Stratos was always there. He was way too good to consider cutting. That was until Konami made the choice for players and banned Stratos in 2013, on September Wait, Stratos was banned on my birthday? What the hell is wrong with me? I'm ruining Yu-Gi-Oh! Stratos' banning at the time was considered random. The list he was a part of, the September 2013 ban list, was a slaughtering ground for the two decks that defined Dragon Ruler format. The rulers themselves, and spellbooks. All of the baby Dragon Rulers, Spellbook of Judgment, Super Rejuvenation, Monster Reborn, Pot of Avarice, Solemn Judgment, Heavy Storm? It'd be easy to miss that Stratos was even hit with how much the game had been shook up. Why Stratos was banned now of all times was even more in question, as Hero was at best a rogue strategy at the time. Sure, it took down YCS San Jose that year, but really? That's what you're worried about? Free Stratos is a community meme that sprouted up in the years following his banning. Every time heroes got new support, or ban list season came around, people would cry out for Stratos to get off the ban list, with the joke evolving to the idea that Stratos was being kept in prison by Konami. An especially popular saying during this time was, "Free my N-word, Stratos." I'm not going down that way. You can't get me down that way. I've trained my whole life to not go down this way. I know who's in Paris. I know who the jabronis are. I know who's doing Aegis Reflector. It's not gonna work! In the time before his unbanning, Hero was languishing, as the best thing they could do was Dark Law Turbo, sliding the opponent $5 in dimes to not remove it, or they would have nothing. Stratos could have been let off the list at any point between his banning and unbanning and have done nothing to the metagame. Maybe made Hero a little bit more rogue than it already was, but it remains as maybe the strangest case of Konami holding a card hostage on the ban list despite its relative power level. And when it finally did come off, it was in the middle of the Link era, where heroes were the worst they had ever been, so f*** you, Jaden. At least it's good in Duel Links! Now, thanks to the hundreds of thousands of people playing every day from all over the world, the thousands of videos of replays, deck profiles, and strategy guides, the hundreds of articles written about the game and all the decks available to play, people have bought into this idea that Duel Links is real. It is not. Duel Links is a figment of our imagination. A Mickey Mouse bullshit version of Yu-Gi-Oh! Created by a jokester who never played the game before. That's the only way to explain how the meta shook out the way it did over multiple points of the game's history. Duel Links card pool is a very, very interesting discussion, because the intended lower power level of the game meant that Konami had to be very discerning about what was introduced into the game. At the dawn of Duel Links, a 1700 attack vanilla level 4 in Axe Raider was considered UR worthy. Reinforcements was a super rare. An additional 500 attack points was seen at the same level as cards that would come out later, like Pot of Avarice and Nightmare Phoenix. We are equals! A side effect of this lower power format is that lower power cards were allowed to flourish in ways they never could under the crushing weight of actual good cards. Single cards that were way better in Duel Links than they ever were in any other format were the series of cards that say, "I don't die this turn." Batlin Boxer Veil, White Princess, Kiteroid, and especially Sphere Karibo were played for years, since surviving with only 4,000 life points was extremely important, and so cards like this were vital to the game's enjoyability. Except when they were used against me, no skill scum-sucking bastards! As for decks that saw more success in Duel Links than they ever saw anywhere else, Amazoness was the earliest deck in Duel Links that just exploded in playability when they didn't have to deal with stuff like Trick Stars, Goki, and Firewall hand loops like they did when they got their good cards. Amazoness Princess was able to search out powerful cards like Amazoness Onslaught on top of summoning monsters from deck in the battle phase. That Onslaught you searched turned all of your Amazonesses into DD Warrior Ladies, which Duel Links was not ready for. As a result, Amazoness went on a world destruction tour, with multiple of their cards being limited for a very long time. A similar deck was Cyber Angels, a deck that didn't see print for years after their introduction in the GX anime. The ability for each of the lower-level rituals to accrue advantage when tributed for their boss monster, Cyber Angel Dakini, was game-changing. And Dakini herself had the powerful ability to remove monsters from the field without destruction. Nephthys, when paired with the Fire King cards, was such an unstoppable strategy that people attribute its success in Duel Links to be the reason it eventually got support in the pack Hidden Summoners. Speaking of deck build packs, Fur Hire was able to see massive success in Duel Links upon release. Without Sky Striker immediately smacking it down, the deck was able to rampage through the Duel Links landscape. A deck whose gimmick is, there's a lot of us, and we're going to make it a problem, had no problems in a format like this. Triamids, Aroma, Red Eyes, and Vendreads. Decks that never got a second look had all eyes on them in Duel Links. Then there's the fucking devil of Duel Links, Shiranui. Shiranui is the deck with the biggest disparity in power levels between the real game and Duel Links. In the real game, drop dead awful, never saw play, and the fans it has wince at the idea of having to play it. Read Shiranui Samurai Saga and tell me there's anything worth saving in this deck besides Solitaire. Well, in Duel Links, you'd swear the Shiranuis had new effects, because they were unstoppable. It wasn't like they went into a weak meta, no, they fought Kristrons, Karakuri, Witchcrafters. Those were actual good decks, and Shiranui just mugged them. Why? Well, it can synchro summon out of the graveyard, they do have a few good monsters like Squire and Solitaire, and Sun Saga, for as much guff as I give the extra deck, is a really good monster. Shiranui was the deck that ran me out of Duel Links. I stopped playing so much just because Shiranui was such an omnipresent deck. I survived 6 Samurai format, I can't do this again! Then there was the question of what Shiranui variant you were facing. Was it vanilla? Trap heavy? Grass Shiranui? Add on the powerful generics like World Legacy Clash and Enemy Controller, and it was impossible to get anything done against them. I remember being in the community at the time, and there were prayer circles going, begging that they didn't get any more of their support, like their Icarus attack, Shiranui's style Swallow Slash. And they did! And years later, when they got their Link monster and a brand new skill made specifically for them due to their impact on Duel Links' meta, they were meta again! Historic Duel Links formats seem like such a fun thing to explore given how unique the game really was. But then you run into the problem of, do you really want to play against a deck like Slash Dragon Control again? The Rata Effect. Not often that we find a fact that hates that it's a fact. The Yu-Gi-Tubing community is a vast ocean of different personalities and comedic styles. So of course, every channel has their own inside jokes and references. If you watch MBT, you're likely to hear about the blank community, stemming from an incident where he ran afoul of the Ghost Trick community.
The gay community.
After he played a Ghost Trick deck that Ghost Trick fans didn't feel captured the spirit of the deck, i.e. he was winning games, they came down on him with thunderous disapproval. There's about a dozen inside jokes stemming from Progression series, banishing a Light and a Dark for how common they used the Chaos monsters, Gage thinking Verdant Sanctuary was a field spell, Kalut for game, so many more I can't even name. Popping the baby from the Dino Smasher's Fury entry is a meme in Farfa's community, namely reciting the joke to make him mad, the easiest thing to do in the world. One YugiTuber, though, stands above the rest when it comes to running jokes, and that's Rata Rank 10 Yugioh. See, Rata's funny, so he's already on a whole different axis to most YugiTubers. His content is almost exclusively scripted, which means that where most YugiTubers rely on good chemistry and improv to keep jokes up, Rata gets to take a whole different approach. As far as running gags go, take your pick. His treatment of Totally Awesome, the hyping up of Abaki, the one whose shape was snatched, Ojama Lime. However, what we're talking about is the only one of these jokes he can't control, and that's the Rata Effect. What the Rata Effect is that if Rata makes a joke about a deck, the deck usually gets support a little while after he makes the video. The earliest case of this happening is in his triple feature on Legacy of the Worthless, where he covered BES, a notoriously underwhelming archetype. A few days later, on Christmas Day no less, they would reveal BEF Zalos, the BES field spell, which prompted Rata to make another video about it. This would happen again with the release of Vampire Sucker, to the same day of the anniversary of Zalos' release. Viacroids, Amazoness, Trains, all seeing their stocks increase thanks to Rata talking about them. Now, this is a phenomenon that both the community and Rata himself put little stock into. I mean, it's a stretch to say that every archetype Rata covers gets support because of his attention. Oh wow, he predicted Blue Eyes is finally gonna get support? Did he also predict the Sunrise? He's done 75 different Yu-Gi-Oh videos, sometimes covering multiple topics in each. If we disqualify all of those decks, there's an ever-shrinking pool he can't claim credit for. That said, I don't know, there's something going on here. Like in the Buster Blader video, he called for the printing of Declaration of Rebirth. And it happened. He asked for a card that gave all the Malefic monsters training wheels. And it happened. In the triple feature between Chemicritters, Digital Bugs, and Triamids, when talking about Triamids, he makes a comment about how the deck would be better if they merged all three field spells into one. But they haven't made a polymerization for field spells. That comment was made on May 25th, 2021. November 4th, 2021, they did it! The card Ursartic Dryatron banishes the two decks' respective field spells to summon out a fusion monster. It's a field spell polymerization. He later pinned a comment saying that this was out of his control, but I'll be damned if I don't try to capitalize on it. Oh, greatest of the rank 10s, I beseech thee, grant me the knowledge that I beg of you. When are the Dark Scorpions getting support?
Did you know Wizardmon wasn't actually a Digimon at first?
Wait, really?
Yeah, no, he was actually from a different Bandai virtual pet line called Magical Witches that Kenji Watanabe also made art for, so they folded it into Digimon and said he hopped over from a parallel digital world called Witchelny, kinda like the alcoholic dad Tamagotchi that got repurposed into Nanimon.
No kidding. Huh. Say, can you, meme up some of that Metaphys support?
Can you suck my ass?
Why do people keep saying that to me? Xtevens. Now, I don't plan on covering a lot of individual YugiTuber topics here. I think that the wider look at the community I did in its own dedicated section is more than enough to call it a job well done. Besides, if you wanted to get into more of the specific dramas, feuds, and controversies in the YugiTubing space, you'd be better served reading or watching a YugiTubing iceberg, which I have no interest in making. That said, if I do end up covering a topic involving YugiTubing all on its own, like the Rata Effect, it's going to be interesting, and that's what we have with Xtevens. Now, Xtevens is part of a subgroup of YugiTubers who make Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan series. Instead of talking about the card game, they'll make these creative works that emulate the anime. There are some that are live action, others that are animated, but they all largely follow a similar plot to the original anime. A hero and their friends fighting off evil through a card game. Some people think they're cringe or weird, but it's no different from making fanfiction. A lot of these series can have production value behind them, and trust me, scripting out an interesting duel is harder than it sounds. Finding a good back-and-forth rhythm that's interesting to watch is hard. Seeing the work that goes into a series like White Dragon Legacy by Treasure Key Studios, or Revelations of the Seal of Orichalcos, which has grown so much in 14 years they had to change aspect ratios, is super charming. I think these sorts of series are cool, and I'm glad that people are willing to put in the effort to make something like it. But what does that have to do with Xtevens? Well, he also made a series like this, and I think you should take a look.
With this card, Brano, your new deck is complete. Happy Lover? But this card seems useless, onomatopoeia. Just play the deck, Brano, and it'll all make sense to you. If you say so.
Yeah, Xtevens' Yugioh series is made by animating dolls and putting clutch cargo-style lips over them, and making them play Yugioh. Now, I don't want to go on my little spiel about respecting the work that goes into these series, and then do a 180 to start dumping on this one, so I will say that I actually enjoy watching these. The series actually does have some solid duel scripting, with inventive combos for the time. You can still watch these and appreciate that Xtevens understood what he was doing and had a knack for the technology he was working with. At the same time, though, it's really impossible to watch these and not wonder, why? If you're the only actor in the cast, why make a majority of the characters the opposite sex? Do you not own a G.I. Joe? The storyline follows these three girls, one of them is a dinosaur, as they duel across the city as Team Bitch Slap, and become the #1 ranked duel cartel. It's like if Battle City never stopped and life was just about wondering when a Nouvelle player was going to make you a statistic. He eventually started starring in these episodes himself using green screen, and I can't tell if that makes it more or less strange. I remember watching these videos when they released back on my mom's laptop, and watching them back, I still feel nostalgic for when tons of people were doing stuff like this, back before the idea of being cringe really took hold. And in case you were wondering, what does this guy look like naked? Like butt booty ass naked? God answered your prayer and gave you the Yu-Gi-Oh! Slut, an Xtevens run channel where he does card reviews and deck profiles. Except they're sexy card reviews and erotic deck profiles. This camera tilts down, and his cock and balls become public information. The Patrick Hoban to Djinn cheat. Cheating in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is illegal. If you get caught. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is one of the most complicated card games you can play, and at the same time is one of the fastest. A game that moves at breakneck speeds that expects you to do long division while making your turns. Keeping track of what you're doing is hard enough. Now imagine doing the same with what your opponent is doing. Cheating in Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be both conscious and unconscious. You could intentionally bend the rules to give yourself an advantage, or you might lean on them to try to catch your breath. Unconscious cheating in Yu-Gi-Oh! Can take the form of things like losing track of if you've normal summoned or not, activating a card without paying its costs, forgetting about a lingering effect, and activating cards you're not supposed to be able to. These are things that could change the outcome of a game to a result it never should have. But a really important rule to remember is this: if nobody at the table caught it, then it was legal. Should you try to fish for moments like this? No, of course not. But if it happens, it happens. Intentional cheats get a lot more interesting, as they range from simple bluffs to mind games to flat out breaking the rules. Remote duels were really bad for cheating. It was every few days you'd hear about an event where somebody's hand would go off screen for a few seconds, come back, and suddenly a brick in their hand was replaced with exactly what they needed. One of the most famous Yu-Gi-Oh! Cheats is kinda hard to call on whether or not it's cheating, but in my mind it's hard to call it anything else. The card Gagaga Cowboy was infamous in the game as a closer card, a rank 4 that could deal 800 damage on detach. If your OTK just missed the mark by 800 or less life points, Cowboy for Game ended games just one turn too soon for the opponent to come back. That phrase, Cowboy for Game, became infamous among the player base as a shorthand for the game is over. Those of us who will never know the glory of heaven might have seen what the cheat is by this point, because it comes in when players would use the effect of Cowboy without actually owning the card. See, when you'd enter main phase 2 and your opponent was under 800 life points, you would say, Cowboy for Game? And they would take that to mean that you were going to use Cowboy to kill them, so they'd scoop to get it over with. In reality though, you were just saying the phrase, and they conceded out of the threat, when really you were just firing blanks. Another one, again with a Wild West theme, weirdly, was Infernities. These were cards that had the potential to do anything under the sun, provided you had no cards in hand. That's fine, just empty your hand with cards like Into the Void or Phantom Hand. But what if you couldn't? What if there were monsters stuck in your hand like Beetle or Archfiend? Well, in the case of not being able to reduce your hand size anymore, a tactic some dirty players adopted was to take Infernity monsters and set them in the back row to pretend they were trap cards. No one could check to see if you were lying or not, so you'd pop off with an empty hand, while your opponent was none the wiser that you were cheating. A common way this cheat was discovered was if the Infernity player went second, set a monster in the back row, and then the opponent shotgun spell or trap removal like MST. You'd shamefully send your set Mirage to the graveyard and get caught as a cheater. Then there's the big one. A cheating scandal that to this day people debate the merit of, involving one of the game's most prolific pro players. Patrick Hoban is competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Royalty. He's a multiple-time YCS winner, deck-building mastermind, and published author on the subject of Yu-Gi-Oh! With his book, Road of the King in 2016. He's an extremely accomplished player that a lot of people have a lot of opinions on. There are those who appreciate and respect him, but then there are those who hate him for his style of play that he advocates for in his book. A style where you interact with your opponent as little as possible to not give away an ounce of information. People picking up the book hoping that it would give them an edge competitively would adopt that and make for boring games. Part of the fun of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that you are playing with a second person. And if that person just keeps their head down and says nothing for the entire game, well, it's kinda boring. There was also what he talked about in his book called angle shoots. Basically legal cheats. An example would be when playing in Shadal format. Muttering to yourself when you lost game 1, didn't even see fusion. That gives your opponent the false idea that you're playing Shadal and didn't see Shadal fusion. Then they would side in cards to beat that. Since you're not actually playing Shadals, the cards they put in would be all but useless, and you could bulldoze through the next game. This is dishonest, but offhand comments like this don't really count as cheating, but they're definitely lame. The lamest of all, though, was a trick used at the ARG Fort Lauderdale event in 2015 when dueling in Necros format. Patrick would ask his opponent to side out Djinn, Releaser of Rituals. This was a card that could lock your opponent out of special summoning when used as ritual material. And in Necros format, it dumbed down the game a lot to an unfun degree. It wasn't uncommon for players to gentleman's out of cards that ruined certain formats, like Sixth Sense back in Dragon Ruler format. And similar things were done with Djinn. Except when Patrick Hoban's opponent sided out their Djinn, he would do the same. And then put in a second copy he had in his side deck. In his book, Patrick Hoban claims to have never used this at a real event, but there are multiple accounts of this happening from the Fort Lauderdale event in 2015. Now, is this a cheat? Sadly, no. It feels like cheating, but a gentleman's agreement is not legally binding, and there's no rule against this exact sort of thing, since it doesn't fall under the idea of misrepresenting the game state, which is an established Yu-Gi-Oh! Rule. The general conclusion the community came to was, it's not cheating, but f*** off. That Fort Lauderdale event was cursed too, because the second place finisher got DQ'd later on because he was stacking his opponent's deck and trying to illegally activate cards. The moral of this story is try to cheat as much as you can. Every cheat you don't try is a rule left unbent. Antoine Griezman. These soccer f***s won't leave me alone! So Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a wealth of people who are charismatic, good on camera, able to improv well, toe company lines, and engage with their communities in fun ways. However, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has never had a prolonged brand ambassador. Most we get are the Shadow Duelist tournaments, where a celebrity comes in, says Ogdoatic, and then leaves. By the way, guys, great job. Last one went off without a hitch. Just took a fourth of a year to put it together. We were close one time though, and that was in 2021 when it was announced that FC Barcelona football player Antoine Griezman would become Yu-Gi-Oh!'s first ever celebrity ambassador. Now it sounds like a strange connection at first, but you have to remember that Konami does other things besides make Yu-Gi-Oh!, even if they didn't remember that for a really long time. Pro Evolution Soccer is a big franchise they produce, and thanks to their ties to the world of professional football, a deal like this isn't out of the realm of possibility. What's more, Antoine himself had a history with the game. Now, it was a lot of DM nostalgia, like remembering Dark Magician existed and posting a picture of a speed duel box to his Instagram, but whatever profits that product scrounged up, I bet had something to do with this. He has 27 million followers, guys! The time frame is a little shaky since a lot of stuff from this deal has since been deleted, but Antoine was announced to be a Yu-Gi-Oh! Brand ambassador in June of 2021. Antoine would be representing Yu-Gi-Oh!, appearing at events, making announcements, signing products, and to solidify the deal, was going to be able to make a card in his honor. Whether that meant it would be in his name and likeness, or that it was just going to be inspired by him, we don't know. He did interviews with community figures like Lithium 2300 and El Dojo del Duelista. He posed with the Duel Disc. He saw what Odd Eye's Pendulum Dragon looked like. Baby, we were cooking! Cooking with dog shit! July 7th, 2021. Antoine Griezman is unceremoniously removed from his position as ambassador and has his contract with Konami cancelled, after a video from 2019 resurfaced where him and fellow Barcelona player Ousmane Dembele were making racist comments at an Asian hotel worker. It should have been on their radar that he would do something like this, because this was after a different racism controversy against a different race, when he did blackface to dress up as a Harlem Globetrotter. Well, no, blackface isn't the right word. Most people stop at the face. They don't go for full arms and legs too! There is so much surface area where he could have realized this was a mistake. How does it just keep going? Antoine's removal as a brand ambassador has had a real negative effect on Konami's community outreach, because despite having perfect candidates, Konami seems gun-shy to pull the trigger on people like Ryan Hunter, a Super Bowl champion with Kansas City in 2019. He played Danger Dark Worlds! Or what about Olympic gold medalist Noah Lyles? He was flashing Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards during the preliminaries leading into the Paris Games where he won his medal. Just give him a copy of Speed Warrior, have him sign it. That's it! At the time of writing, actually, they're about to give this a second shot as a new card was revealed based on baseball player Shohei Ohtani's dog. Level 1 normal light beast. Alright guys, Yummy Primate is live. Firewall Dragon dodges the ban list. The Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime is a vehicle to tell beautiful stories about friendship, the bonds we make with other people, finding worth in the worthless, and the pains of growing up. It's also a toy commercial. These two things are both correct, and one doesn't negate the other. The tie-in that the card game has with the anime is oftentimes a boon. Decks that see a lot of meta success and that are fan favorites get loads of support and get to act as the perfect on-ramp for anime viewers to become card game players. Blackwings are a great example of this. Crow is a popular character in the anime, he uses Blackwing cards are putting up results? Let's make more Blackwings! Some people took this a little too far and assumed the story of 5Ds was rewritten around their popularity, but that's for later. What happens when the opposite case is true? When a card is hated in the real game and that affects its usage and popularity in the anime? We talked about a card that would go unmentioned in the Death of Yu-Gi-Oh! Section, and it's time to finally reveal the culprit. Firewall Dragon was the ace monster of Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrain's main character, Yusaku. It followed the template of all the ace monsters beforehand by having 2500 attack, being the final boss of the main character's deck, and like everyone past Neos, had an effect. Whereas previous ones had ranged from really good, like Stardust, to kind of underwhelming, like Utopia, Firewall Dragons was completely broken, able to bounce multiple monsters to the hand from the field or grave, including itself, which was a good thing because clearing up the extra monster zone was extremely important in the Link era, and using it multiple times in one turn was possible because it wasn't a once-per-turn effect. It could also special summon monsters from hand when cards were sent to the graveyard, and instead of being a soft once per turn like that first effect, this was a nonce per turn! You could use the effect infinitely, and since Firewall itself made it so your hand would always be full thanks to the bouncing, you could infinitely recur powerful monsters over and over again for no cost. This made it ripe for abuse with cards like Cannon Soldier to FTK opponents. Clearly this card sucks. Why is it not at the bottom of a lake? Well, its role as the ace monster for Vrain's main character gave it real-world plot armor. It couldn't reasonably be gotten rid of if multiple episodes and duels had been scripted around the use of Firewall Dragon. There was no other card that could fit the purposes they had written Firewall to be used for, and so it had to stick around. As the real-world formats got worse and worse, more and more of a stink had been made to get Firewall Dragon banned. Multiple events were ruined by its existence, and the boards it could make. All the while, our Sound and Fury accomplished nothing. That is until December 19th, 2018. The Vrain's episode, What's Beyond Instinct, aired, and the end of the episode was also the end of Firewall Dragon's life. Firewall Dragon would never be summoned in the show again, as 15 days prior, he was banned in the TCG, and 13 days later, he would be banned in the OCG. The damage Firewall had done was finally enough that he was banned from the game, written out of the show, and the duties of Ace Monster were passed on to the secondary ace, Decode Talker. The final clash of the show wasn't the upgraded Firewall Dragon Dark Fluid against the Arrival Cybers at Ignister. Instead, it was Access Code Talker. And the show ended with Dark Templar at Ignister facing off with Decode Talker. We'll never know the full story, but there's no way that these two events aren't related. The breaking of Firewall and his removal from the show. Firewall was written out with more than a fourth of the show left to go, leaving on episode 82 of 120. And Decode Talker's appearances went from modest in the early show to ballooning by the end, now that there was a vacancy. This sort of change to a show's scripting has never, and probably will never happen again. But then again, hopefully it never will need to happen because they wouldn't make a card this broken again. Noble Knight Favoritism. This is personal. So you might remember that I've touched on Noble Knights a few times in this discussion. They were the very first TCG exclusive archetype made for the American release of Galactic Overlord, and are based on various Arthurian legends and weapons. They revolve around equip spells and normal monsters. You have the main monster, Artorigus, who was given a poem in place of flavor text, which is very unique. You have Boars and Maedrot, who are pseudo-Gemini monsters who gain their effects when equipped with equip cards, and the equips themselves based on famous swords like Excalibur and Clarent. The deck focused around either Xyz summoning into stronger forms of Artorigus, or Synchro summoning into stronger forms of their Lancelot stand-in, Lancelin, with them each growing stronger the more equips they had attached. Now we all know that parents love their firstborn more than anything else, and I can understand Konami of America being really excited to showcase that they could make cards too, but holy hell they pushed Noble Knights too hard. Noble Knight Favoritism refers to the insane amount of support that Noble Knights have gotten over the years, with every Xyz era pack past Galactic Overlord containing at least one new piece of support for the deck. Heavy pushes to make decks relevant aren't uncommon, especially anime ones like Salamangrates. When they debuted in Soul Fusion, there were like 10 new Salamangrate cards a day. Noble Knights, though, are a totally game original archetype, which makes their push all the more remarkable. Where most TCG exclusive archetypes get around 20 cards to work with, as of today, Noble Knights are just a hair shy of 60 cards. You could run a deck of only Noble Knight cards and not play a single duplicate. You think that's a lot? Where do you think they came from? In a move that Konami of America has never tried since, they released the Knights of the Round Table box, a structure box that included a full Noble Knight deck, mat, sleeves, and brand new support. You think giving them their own product was a lot? How about their own exclusive rarity? Noble Knights have a rarity that was only ever used in the Knights of the Round Table box called Platinum Rare, where elements of the card get this high sheen finish to look like platinum. Konami wanted Noble Knights to take off so badly, but the whole thing fell apart when people realized Noble Knights suck. This is the reason that Noble Knight Favoritism is so noteworthy. They gave them so much support, years worth. Up to this very day, we still get Noble Knights, and they're still just bad. Now, it's not fair to say that every Noble Knight card is bad. It is to say most are, but there is an exception. And it's an exception that the entire player base took exception to. I sold Two Tales of the Noble Knights. This Link 2 Light Warrior monster was the bane of many duelists' existence for many years. Every time this card came down, you knew some heinous bullshit was about to happen. So many of the 2018 Dark Warrior decks that spat out Rongonimiad were built on the back of Isold. And it wasn't until years later that she was finally banned, causing problems the entire way to the grave. They love Noble Knights so much, they gave them a spin-off! After they exhausted Arthurian legend, they moved over to France for the French equivalent of King Arthur, Charlemagne, and the Epic of Roland. You want to know the best part? In one support wave, the Infer Noble Knights beat the dog shit out of the Noble Knights. They are so much better, it's comical that these two decks are related. And the Noble Knights are so bad, only one of their cards sees any play in Infer Noble Knights after Isold got banned. And it's just the search spell. Can't wait to see you all tomorrow when Noble Knights get their own attribute and format dedicated to them. Mad Lobster. So maybe it's a good thing Konami doesn't credit all of its artists. Controversies around Yu-Gi-Oh! Card art are surprisingly minimal. Konami has done a good job nipping any problems in the bud before they can actually flower into a problem, like lengthening skirts and removing scissors. Yeah, son, you can invoke the powers of hell and evil and Satan. Are those not safety scissors? On very, very rare occasions, though, there will be some sort of problem that Konami runs into with the artwork that requires alteration. Some of these you could call censoring, but they're not all for the usual reasons like blood and boobs. The fairy tale series are a group of little critters dressed up as famous fairy tale princesses like Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and our subject, Snow White. Fairy tale Snow is evil and going to hell when she dies, but that's besides the point. In the Japanese version of the card, the colors of the monster's dress are pretty much a one-for-one copy of the version of Snow White from Disney's movie. While they were able to get away with that in Japan, to hedge their bets, Snow was given a brand new color palette in America in order to avoid the chance of Disney coming after them. The artwork of Earthbound prisoner Groundskeeper was edited to remove the chain from around his neck. Why this one was done is a little bit more vague, but an idea is that they didn't want to evoke the imagery of slavery by having a monster in chains. The biggest one, though, comes from an extremely unassuming card, Mad Lobster. Released in Cybernetic Revolution, it's a common normal monster with okay stats. Maybe when they released later normal monster support like Just a Break it would see some play, but why does this card matter? Well, the reason is much more insidious than the last two, because the artwork was stolen. The artwork for Mad Lobster is a modified version of Sea Claw from the game Altile, a TCG released in 2004. You've probably never heard of it, but it was a fairly interesting game, releasing as mainly a Flash-based browser game in Japan before having a brief release in America in 2008. If you want to try it out now, there's a simulator on Steam you can download. The artwork is changed slightly, likely tracing, but comparing the placement of the claws across both versions is really all you need to see to tell you that it's a copy. Instead of altering the artwork further, Konami scrapped the entire thing and redrew Mad Lobster from the ground up. New background, changed the pose, added detail, went all out and reissued Cybernetic Revolution to make sure the proper release got into people's hands. Ever since, Konami has made sure to never let a mistake like this slip through again, and the artist was peacefully decapitated to send a message to the rest about what happens when you make Daddy worry. Now they avoid this by making cards like Psychic End Punisher where you can't even tell what it's supposed to be. Eldlich and Laundry Dragonmaid. Fans love taking two completely unrelated monsters who share nothing from an artistic perspective and saying, they'd go bowling. Whether it be for gameplay reasons or simply because it'd be funny, cards have been mashed together into impromptu friendships in the fandom for years. A big one that took off as a meme in Japan was Melfi Rabi and Divine Arsenal AA Zeus Sky Thunder. Zeus's ability is to overlay on top of any Xyz monster that battled that turn, and since it was released only a set after the Melfi archetype, people found it funny that you could convert Joyous Melfi into Zeus. The joke eventually became that Melfi Rabi had the ability to transform into Zeus if you made him upset. One that goes even deeper, though, is the relationship between Eldlich the Golden Lord and Laundry Dragonmaid. The pairing of these two monsters as best friends is extremely popular in the community, all stemming from their unintended synergy in Japan. See, Laundry Dragonmaid, despite having charisma to spare, is easily the worst Dragonmaid. Its ability to mill 3 off of the top of the deck when summoned is actively detrimental to the deck if it misses, so both it and its dragon form are removed from most Dragonmaid builds. Because of that, Laundry Dragonmaid gained a sort of loser charm in Japan. It was the smallest, cutest, and weakest Dragonmaid, so people were looking for any excuse to play her, which, ironically, led to her becoming the most popular Dragonmaid. This popularity even landed her a role as a mate in Master Duel, one of the very first deluxe mates too, which meant she would shift between her dragon form and maid form. People looking to seriously use the card even found that she was a decent choice in decks that didn't use their normal summon and liked having cards in the grave. This thing is a great addition to paleo decks, like I wouldn't bring it up, but also Eldlich decks. Seeing as Eldlich usually only plays one monster, Eldlich himself, and all the spell traps you play have graveyard effects, Japanese players thought that Laundry would be a fine addition as you weren't using your normal summon for anything else, and it could get some powerful spell and traps into the graveyard where they were needed most. This wasn't the best build of Eldlich, but it was one of the most popular, because it had Laundry Dragonmaid in it. This started a snowball effect where people just really enjoyed the idea that this evil alchemical zombie, ruler of his own nation of gold, who mutated and warped invaders into his unwitting slaves, also had a friend. Artwork will show the two hanging out, going on trips. Really, whatever scenario the artist picks, somehow the two just fit into. The biggest force for this pairing is Japanese artist Kiyoshi Hitano, who has drawn dozens and dozens of pictures of Laundry Dragonmaid over the years. And there's a 50-50 chance that Eldlich is in them, and they are adorable. You got Laundry introducing her new friend to the other maids, Laundry accidentally ripping Eldlich's cape, Laundry dressing up as Eldlich for Gold Week. Even the massive mural of every version of Laundry Dragonmaid has an Eldlich snuck in there. My favorite, though, is the one where Laundry Dragonmaid is trying to sell her art on the streets and is getting upstaged by Card Trooper's AI art of boobies. Who's the only person going to go buy Laundry Dragonmaid's artwork? Eldlich. Yu-Gi-Oh fans are usually horrible, but when it comes to making cute little relationships, they're alright. Indomitable Fighter Lei Lei. Okay, so this is another warning like with Tyler the Great Warrior. No jokes this segment, it's a heavy one, involving the loss of a child. So prepare yourself. Leighton Kurashima was an employee at Upper Deck Entertainment during the time them and Konami were working together on the distribution of Yu-Gi-Oh cards in the West. He was a product manager who worked closely with the TCG department and had formed a friendship with many members of the staff who worked there, who even gave him the nickname Lei Lei. Leighton would take some time off in the near future though, as he was set to become a father to his son Aelin in October of 2005. Aelin would be born, but unfortunately would pass away only 2 hours after being born, leaving Leighton and his wife Molly devastated. As a way to cope with his loss, Leighton would end up trying to bury himself in his work at Upper Deck. Except when he returned after losing his child, he discovered the TCG department had pulled some strings to create a card in his honor. This was Indomitable Fighter Lei Lei, a copy-paste of Goblin Attack Force in almost every way, except for the way you can circumvent its defense position effect. Like Giant Orc, Lei Lei switches to defense position when it attacks. But, like Giant Orc as well, it has a Union monster that has the effect to change its battle position and circumvent the weakness. For Giant Orc, it's Second Goblin. And for Lei Lei, it's Protective Soul Aelin, a card made in the memory of Leighton's lost son, who had the effect to protect Lei Lei and make him stronger. Based on the release schedule of Cybernetic Revolution and the birth of Aelin, I believe these cards were made preemptively, as in they wanted to pay tribute to Leighton and Aelin before Aelin's unfortunate passing. Cybernetic Revolution was released in May of 2005 in the OCG, and August of the same year in the TCG, while Aelin wouldn't be born until October. It didn't diminish the effect of the message behind the cards, though. In fact, it took on a whole new meaning. No matter what, Aelin would always be by Leighton's side for the love they got to share all too briefly. Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't often move you to tears, but the story of Indomitable Fighter Lei Lei and Protective Spirit Aelin is one that shakes even the most stone-hearted. The Covid Banlist. 2020 sucked. All you had to do was live through it and you would know what I mean. It was hard being totally sedentary, both physically and mentally. Being cooped up broke a lot of people's brains and they never really fixed themselves. Yugioh was a small comfort, but this was when they were scrambling to find out how exactly Yugioh would work on a large digital scale. Even then, if you were looking for official Konami-sanctioned ways to play, it was kinda grim. Seeing the mental well-being of the world was at an all-time low, Konami decided to do a small gesture of good faith and put out an emergency ban list. One of those good faith emergencies. On February 20th, 2021, Konami updated the OCG ban list with a new card, Pestilence. This was a super old equip card, back from when they were still nerfing cards by making them type reliant, which Konami banned as a way to show goodwill and hoping for the end of the pandemic to come sooner rather than later. It was purely a silly ban, as the card itself is bad and not used in anything, and more just a way to show solidarity, with the ban itself being lifted on April Fool's Day. And to show how nice it was, I would like to quickly go over all the cards that dodged this ban list that I think deserved it. Crush Card Virus, Deck Devastation Virus, Eradicator Epidemic Virus, Grinning Grave Virus, Cell Explosion Virus, Doom Virus Dragon, Tribe Infecting Virus, Virus Cannon, Amorphage Infection, Infestation Infection, Infestation Pandemic, Pandemic Dragon? Okay, how did he escape the list? Toons are a parody of Magic. Magic's influence on the TCG landscape is as wide as it is blatant. You can find the DNA of Magic in almost every TCG released, whether it be their use of a resource system like lands in the case of Pokemon's energies, or the mana in Hearthstone, or mechanics like summoning sickness. Yu-Gi-Oh! Might seem like it doesn't fit the mold, as its speed is 100 times that of Magic, with the average turn count of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game equaling how long it takes a Magic game to get going, but Yu-Gi-Oh! Is cut from the exact same cloth. Don't believe me? Guess what Yu-Gi-Oh! Was originally called back in the manga? No, not Duel Monsters. It was called Magic and Wizards. The inspiration is so obvious, but it doesn't just end at stuff as blatant as the name of the original game. Phases like the standby phase are adapted from Magic the Gathering's upkeep phase. The stack is the basis for Yu-Gi-Oh's chain system. The influence goes as deep as the bones of the game. Then there's the, less not blatant ones. Those being these two beauty queens. Morinfen and Summoned Skull are two of the most iconic fiend monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Yes, Morinfen. You probably don't know this card, but this beautifully unique card crash is a fan-favorite card in Japan. Its stats are pathetic for a level 5, but not so pathetic that he's searchable off of the battle tutors like Mystic Tomato. Because of that, and how drop-dead ugly he is, he became a meme in Japan that got so popular it was referenced not only in Duel Links, but got him his own custom sleeves that you can buy for your deck. There's also porn of him. Anyway, Morinfen is based on the Magic card, Morinfen, a monster who doesn't exactly resemble our Morinfen, but then again, nothing resembles Morinfen. Summoned Skull, you might be surprised to learn, isn't wholly original, and if you were going off the more recent arts, you might not catch it. But take a look at his rendering from the original manga in the Magic and Wizards era, and then look at the Magic card, Lord of the Pit. It even has Summoned Skull's Japanese name on the original card, Summoned Demon. Heck, sometimes the influence shines through too brightly, and you get something like the original printing of the card Wall of Illusions, which instead of putting monsters, wrote creatures, like how they're referred to in Magic. Despite how much Magic has given Yu-Gi-Oh!, Yu-Gi-Oh! Still decided to thumb Richard Garfield in the eye with an archetype made to make fun of Magic the Gathering. And that archetype you probably already know. Toons are the bait-and-switch archetype of the first antagonist of the Duel Monsters series, Maximilian Pegasus. You expect the big bad to have a terrifyingly strong deck, but instead it's full of cute cartoons that squash and stretch their way out of all damage. Doesn't seem to have much to do with Magic, but it takes looking at the mechanics of the Toon archetype to understand what it's doing. Toon monsters can't attack the turn they're summoned, and they can attack directly as long as the card Toon World is up. How this applies to Magic the Gathering is in that summoning sickness mechanic I mentioned. magic creatures can't attack the turn they're summoned, just like Toon monsters. As for the other effect, magic creatures don't have to destroy all the opponent's creatures to attack directly like they do in Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is reflected in the Toon's direct attack effect. All of this is wrapped up in how Toon monsters get this effect by having Toon World up, their version of one of Magic's land cards. If you thought Flower Cardians were the only Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck that emulated other card games, think again. Spell Chronicle. Lying is so f***ing cool. The influence that pro players have over the general playing populace isn't understood by a lot of people. If a pro Yu-Gi-Oh! Player scratches his leg during grand finals, people will be trying to figure out what his underwear is to see if it can give them an advantage. Pro players have a history of using this to their advantage. They know that their accolades make them desirable to emulate for net deckers and less experienced duelists. So they use this prestige to essentially get the community chasing their own tails. A perfect example of this was in hat format, when, independent of any tournament results, a group of pro players came to the conclusion that the best deck was in fact not the hand artifact trap trick deck that the format was named for, but Xtevens, a series of plant monsters. These pro players leveraged this knowledge by using suboptimal decks, hyping up the choices they made as the best ones to make, and then turning around and using Xtevens instead to massive success. A 2,500 person event was topped by Xtevens, and it was largely due to pro players keeping Xtevens tight to their chest and nobody knowing the counterplay because it wasn't a common choice. A slightly similar thing happened in branded format when pro player Pak used a small Preda package in his deck thanks to its fusion synergy, and especially hyped up the card Preda Practice as the linchpin. The card shoots up to $40, and that version of the deck dies off. The theme seems to be that if they're telling you plants are good, they're either Jessica Robinson or lying. The most infamous buyout in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, though, was done a bit more maliciously by these trustworthy pro players. This is Spell Chronicle, a card used in the GX anime by Yubel that banished 5 speller traps from your deck and could slowly add them back to your hand over the course of a few turns. This card stinks like doo-doo. It's slow, reliant on the opponent, and has a downside. You know you can just play cards that don't hurt you if they're destroyed, right? The real story of Spell Chronicle comes from pro player Alexander Lizgath. He has a username, but I'm not saying the words based lolly over and over again. Alexander was a super popular pro player. He had multiple tops, a lot of respect in the community, and most importantly, was a fan of less popular deck choices. He was one of the few people, for instance, using a small Blue Eyes package during Dragon Ruler format, piloting that to a top 16 finish at an ARG event. So when Shadal and Burning Abyss were due for release, he hyped up Spell Chronicle as a great card in those decks, as they're graveyard-based, and all those cards in your hand are sent to the graveyard for Spell Chronicle's effect. Other pro players like Jeff Jones joined in, hyping up the card as a fever pitch was reached, and the card went from a worthless common to over $10 a copy. The thing is, though, that Spell Chronicle wasn't as good as it read on the tin, thanks to the discard being a cost and therefore not proccing the effects of the monsters you discarded. By the time people realized what was going on, though, it was too late, and hundreds of people now owned worthless cards they paid out the nose for. That's right, pro players pumped and dumped the player base. I don't know if players like Alex and Jeff had a financial stake in Spell Chronicle sales, but regardless, it's one of the biggest cases of pro players influencing the player base for the worse. Hope is a girl's name. Oh, this one's got layers. So, Konami doesn't like us. We hardly know anything about how this game is made. You could tell us they find new cards under a cabbage leaf, and we'd kinda just have to go with it. This wasn't always the case, though, as for a time, we had a way to not only learn about the inner workings of the game, but directly probe one of the people responsible for it. Time for layer 1 of this subject. Pojo is a website dedicated to all sorts of different hobbies, specifically card games. For our purposes, it was the #1 place for people to talk about and trade information about Yu-Gi-Oh! This website is the Library of Alexandria for Yu-Gi-Oh! If you have any questions about the history of the game, there's bound to be a Pojo post about it. I got so much information for this project from old Pojo posts because legitimately reading one of them is like taking a time machine. For old deck profiles, I go to Pojo. For community drama, I go to Pojo. For authentic looks at the perception of the game from the player base who played it at the time, I go to Pojo. If you troll too deeply into Pojo posts though, you're gonna find layer 2, Kevin Tewart. Kevin is a former Upper Deck employee and current Konami one that worked on Yu-Gi-Oh! Both as a product manager, card tester, before eventually becoming the head of US development at Konami of America. Kevin is somebody who's worked on Yu-Gi-Oh! For decades, spanning back to early releases like Pharaonic Guardian and Magician's Force. As a Konami employee, Kevin's posting on Pojo was highly unusual and equally exciting. He was an active participant in the forums and would directly talk to the player base. For a game that has such a horrible player communication system, to have an employee willing to talk with the most passionate parts of the fan base is something most other TCGs will have by default, but it was still incredible. Layer 3, it all goes wrong. Both sides have problems that kept us from having a good time and meaningful discussion. Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans are Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans. Of course we'd be annoying. Any problem at all would be blasted into Kevin's face at max volume, even if it's something he was uninvolved in, like OCG card design. Now, outside of general fandoms are horrible discussions, Kevin didn't exactly do himself any favors. Kevin's posts were often blunt and could come off as dismissive, as well as his posts being weird. This leads us to our final layer for the subject, Tewart posting. This is the name given to the most ridiculous of Kevin's posts that have either aged poorly or were always a little off. A normal example of this is upon the release of Xyz monsters. People had questions about the status of monsters used as material. They're technically still on the field, just under an Xyz monster. So do they count as being on the field? And are they being sent from the field to the graveyard when detached as Xyz material? If so, Tour Guide into Sangan was about to break the game, because any rank 3 worth its salt would become Last Will. Monsters who had effects that activated when they left the field would be insanely good as Xyz material. Kevin was insistent, to the point of aggravation, that this was how it worked. Cards with effects when leaving the field would proc when detached as Xyz material. Cards like Sangan and Reborn Tengu would therefore become unstoppable. It turns out, though, that he was just wrong. That's not how it would work, and these posts led to a lot of confusion at the start of the era for how the mechanic worked. One of the other posts that soured people's opinion on Kevin was the post where he discussed what cards people wanted to see reprinted in Turbo Pack 3. When the King of Darkness, Ganondorf Dragmire, got excited at the prospect of classic card Waboku being printed in a higher rarity, Kevin shot it down, saying that his personal dislike of the card would keep it from ever getting printed in a nice rarity. And it's true. Waboku has never been printed at a rarity above common, save for some printings in obscure ugly rarities like Mosaic Rare. Leaving Pojo for a second to Kevin's defunct Twitter reveals 2 posts detailing the origins of hated cards that he had a hand in designing. One is Gateway of the Six, a card that transformed 6 Samurai from a fun control deck with a cool theme into a meta-defining combo spam deck that haunts it to this day. The other one was a post saying he was working on a new anti-special summoning card exclusive to the TCG. Given the time he posted this, it was clear the card he was talking about is Max C, one of the most hated cards of all time that's still impacting the meta today. But those are just the posts people got upset about. Then there's the posts people got confused about, like the one where he's debating the merits of buying single cards instead of sealed products. To make his analogy, he said, "Imagine I have a gas station and all of my gas pumps have clown designs all over them, and I charge $20 a gallon for gas. Meanwhile, the regular gas station down the road is charging regular prices. But I've convinced a bunch of people that buying my clown gas is the only way to go, so they refuse to buy gas the regular way. Then they come to Pojo and ask why clown gas is so expensive." The metaphor falls apart when you remember the gas station down the road has a 1 in 500 chance of giving you 1/3 of the gas you actually want. Then there's the crown jewel. This one starts innocuously as somebody asking, why did you change the name of number 39 from King of Wishes Hope to Utopia? You want a list? Okay. No, I didn't. I didn't ask for that. He goes on to list various reasons why the name was changed. Number 1. Hope is a dumb name for a monster. Already wrong, King of Wishes Hope is a badass name. Number 2, it's a highly charged political slogan because of the Obama administration in 2008. Number 3, it reminds people of Sunday school. And number 4, it's a girl's name. His name was changed because they didn't want people thinking Utopia was a girl. That's the one people laugh at the most, but I actually like reason 7 a little bit more. An accurate translation of the Japanese name is King of Wishes, which is a fine name, but is more of a descriptor than a proper name. And this monster is a unique entity rather than one of many. He's not even the only number 39! He used a similar explanation as to why the Light Lord archetype was translated into Light Sworn. Because Lord is a masculine title, and Lightsworns contain a number of female and animal monsters. Whatever trepidations over that there were gone by the time of Dark Lords, since they have ladies, horses, catmen, skeletons, all somehow macho enough to be lords. Why do you have to stop posting? I want to see him back in the f***ing pit. JoJo inspired Yugioh. I've said a lot so far about the influences that other medias had on the original run of Yugioh. Kazuki Takahashi was an avid fan of loads of different mediums and creators who all in some way contributed to Yugioh. We've talked about the overt stuff that gets referenced, like horror movies, but it comes down to even individual creators who influenced Takahashi's work. Kazuki Takahashi's got an obvious love for American comic books, and has named artists like Drew Struzan, Adam Hughes, and Mike Mignola as the best of the best, the type he aspires to be like, but knew he could never reach. Manga also had its fair influence on Takahashi, and you'll never guess what 3 he says are the biggest influence. That's right, Dragon Ball, Akira, and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. It should really be a given that any thing made is probably inspired by those 3. Look how many Akira slides are in 5Ds. When they heard this season was gonna be on bikes, they probably peed a little. But our focus here is specifically on JoJo's, both in the ways that Takahashi has directly stated and the implied ones. Takahashi listed Hirohiko Araki as a very direct source of inspiration on a few different occasions, with other creators getting lumped into many other creator sections, while Araki is mentioned by name. As for what in JoJo directly influenced Yugioh, Takahashi says that JoJo's exploration of the duality between light and dark influenced Yugioh a lot, with the divide between Baby Yugi and Atem especially reflecting this in the school arc thanks to Atem's ruthless nature. As for the inferred influences, you need look no further than the Darby brothers of Part 3, Stardust Crusaders, a pair of stand-using brothers who challenged the Joestar gang to games like poker and virtual baseball, with their souls on the line should they lose. Along with these fights taking place in Egypt, and the 4-year gap between the completion of Part 3 and the start of Yugioh, makes me think that maybe the basis for the penalty games and interest in Egypt started with Takahashi reading Stardust Crusaders. Takahashi would also end up contributing a piece of artwork featuring the stand Crazy Diamond and the character Josuke for the 25 Years of JoJo booklet, alongside dozens of other artists. Wow, he didn't even pick the right Josuke, fake fan! Bobobo Bo Bobo Bo. Bobobo Bo Bobo Bo is an anime and manga series created by manga writer and illustrator Yugioh Sawai. It follows the adventures of a master of the Fist of the Nose hairstyle, Bobobo Bo Bobo Bo, on his journey to defeat the evil Hair Hunt troops and save the world from baldness brought about by Tsar Baldy Bald III. The series is a complete gag manga that revels in mocking manga and anime tropes while working on its own internal logic, which is none at all. Power scaling Bobobo characters is like power scaling Looney Tunes characters. You're better off eating the pencil than trying to write anything down with it. The series might actually be the very first anime that I ever watched besides Pokemon, and it was the one I instantly fell in love with. I don't know what it was, because I barely remember any of the jokes, and the jokes they were making were to series that I had never read. But I think when I was younger, it was just silly enough to keep my attention. That, and there was a fucking badass Dawn Patch edit set to Still Waiting by Sum 41. White boys, stop getting the face tattoos and doing rap and return to your jobs, making AMV music! Anyway, what does this have to do with Yugioh? Well, since Bobobo took place in the pages of Shonen Jump, a frequent source for comedy in the series was drawing in specific characters that they were parodying. Like, let's say, pulling a series out of the hat here, you wanted to parody Kaneko Man, which has just wrapped up Season 2 of the Perfect Origin arc, which is fully watchable up to the halfway point of the full arc, and is still currently in the midst of the 4th arc, which is being translated right now, which you can read wherever good manga is stolen. I lost my train of thought. Anyway, they dress up as Sunshine, Ashura Man, and Big the Budo. When trying to speed through the villain Halikulani's board game of death, Bobobo summons Yugi from his afro to use the powers of Slifer the Sky Dragon to blast his way forward. Now, Yugioh is a talented artist, but god, he captured Takahashi's style perfectly! That's because, either as a favor or as a fan of the series, this panel of Yugi was actually drawn by Takahashi himself. Only Yugi though, as the rest of the panel is still Yoshio's work. But it's an incredible detail for a parody to seemingly have the sanctioning of the original author that they're poking fun at. Every other goddamn video game I didn't mention before that's worth bringing up that's not another goddamn simulator, because I can't mention every single one of them. Like, you really think there's anything to say about the Chaos Trilogy on PC, or Decades Duel Plus, or Millennium Duels? Newsflash, those are the same game! You think Dawn of Destiny, or Hearts Awaken, or Spirit Caller should all get their own entries? There are nearly 60 of these games, I can't cover all of them! And the ones I plan on covering aren't all that deep either! They're a concept, and then they're done. It's pointless to waste any more time talking about them! Also, Hearts Awaken isn't a real game, I made that one up! So Destiny Board Traveler is a GBA party game. Fuck you, Tommy Pickles. It plays like a board game with a kind of Yu-Gi-Oh theme. It's like Monopoly, but you can fight Baltic Avenue. You get to pick the faces of your die, which correspond to monsters that you would use to battle with available monster spaces. But high-value monsters like Blue Eyes, Red Eyes, and Dark Magician need tributes, which means you need to give up owned property to use stronger monsters. It's an interesting game for certain, but diseases are interesting too. This game sucks! Speaking of interesting games that stink big time, there's Wheelie Breakers, a Yu-Gi-Oh! Kart racer set in the 5Ds era. I've actually talked about this game at length before, but I sucked at it back then, so don't go digging too deeply. It doesn't have a drift, every vehicle feels like a plank of wood, and the less I know about the designer's sick fascination with Sonic Chick, the better. Yu-Gi-Oh! Bam is an interesting one. Psych, it's in this section, Pranked. This was a version of Yu-Gi-Oh! Playable through sites like Kongregate and Facebook, and is similar to Cross Duel, where the game is kind of Yu-Gi-Oh!, but really just an appearance. It plays totally differently. It's made for even quicker games than the original Yu-Gi-Oh!, as now you get 3 cards a turn. put them into 3 columns, and battle the monsters your opponent puts in their columns. The game had loads of spell and traps, as well as monsters, with either blanket generic effects like Rage, that increased attack if you lost life points, and Last Stand, where monsters get stronger if you have no cards in deck, on top of unique effects that were just labeled as unique. I think the game is most famous now for making Google searches really confusing back around the time it was active until 2016. Cause you'd look up a card like Hitatsumi Giant, and you'd either get the card you wanted, or find the BAM version, which said it was a level 1, had 500 life points, and got sad when it died. You wanna see the laugh hurricane we're working with? Yu-Gi-Oh! Card Almanac. This game isn't a game. This is the worst product that has ever been released, because it's a Wikipedia article on a DS cartridge. The point of this game is to be an almanac containing every card released prior to the set Strike of Neos. That's it. Well, no, that's not fair. The game does have a dice roller, coin flipper, and calculator to help you keep track of life points. Neat! World Championship 2011 has that, but you might hate Yu-Gi-Oh! And just want to use it for family game night. It also has a robust list of combos, like Summon Starboy while Umiruka is up to increase your water monster's attack by 1,000 points. Or use this 4-card combo of Black Pendant, Mecha Dog Marin, Dark Room of Nightmares, and Iron Blacksmith Kotetsu to deal 2,100 damage. This is what passed for a combo. Yu-Gi-Oh! Games are bad, don't play them. You know what, don't play Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan-made formats. So with the recent news that Konami is planning on killing Time Wizard and replacing it with the much worse Time Travel alt format, you might wonder if Konami even likes alternate formats. I mean, they only embraced them in 2022, actually kept one of them around, and is now throwing it in a burlap sack and then into a river. Likely the standard going forward is the standard it's always been. If you want to play an alt format, you're going to have to go off the beaten path and look for what the fans have made. Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans know what they want out of the game more than anyone, so for years have been making rule sets by which people can play Yu-Gi-Oh!, but a little weird. Hands down, the most prolific, favorite, and fan-supported alt format is Trinity format, named for elemental hero Trinity, who is just there for brand recognition. Trinity is a format that seeks to shake up Yu-Gi-Oh! In a few key ways, with the 2 biggest ones being its deck construction rules and playstyle. For deck construction, Trinity comparts to Magic's Highlander format, whereby multiples of a card are not allowed. You're only allowed to play a single copy of any given card in your deck. Not only does this make it so decks are inherently less consistent thanks to the lack of multiples of their best cards, it also means the decks are going to have to try to find ways to reach the deck limit. Do you supplement it with an additional engine, a complementary deck, good generic staples? As you're going to find out, that's harder than it sounds. The deck limit in Trinity format is only 30 rather than 40. And for every 5 cards you go above the limit, you get a point that can be used to either put a half a point or a full point into getting new cards for your deck, or copying an unlimited card. These half and full point cards are your generic staples, so if you want to buff your deck, you're going to have to make some uncomfortable choices. The ban list as well is custom and better articulates why cards are hit, with a category for cards that negatively impacted the health of the format, and one for cards that go against the philosophy of the format itself. As for the gameplay changes, Trinity refers to the number of summons you get a turn. In any given turn, you get 3 special summons of effect monsters, and are therefore hugely limited in the explosiveness of your turn. All of these serve to make an easier to approach Yu-Gi-Oh! That, while having its own complexities with the whole point system that can turn a lot of people off, also serve as a great way for veteran players to get something new out of their favorite game, and introduce new players to what actual Yu-Gi-Oh! Looks like, and not the Konami-sanctioned way, which is, and now you gotta summon Gemini Elf, and attack for a massive amount of damage. Master Duel has also gotten its dose of alt formats, with far and away the best one being NR format. Inspired by an event that Konami has bafflingly only run twice, NR format is a format where every card above rare rarity is banned. That sounds like it would be an annoying format to play, since most generic and even in-archetype playmakers and finishers are locked above SR. But instead it meant that players would get creative with what would work. Decks like Megalith, Metal Foes, and Vendreads were printed almost entirely in common. Extra deck staples weren't Access Code Talker, Nightmare Unicorn, and Appaloosa, they were Black Ship of Corn, Malevolent Sin, and Bamboozling Gossip Shadow. Cards that don't even count as decks became unbeatable, meta-warping god beasts in NR format. Mother Spider was a deck you could play until the community brought it under control. Speaking of which, yes, despite being an event only run twice, fans have kept the spirit of the format alive to this day, and have kept an ongoing ban list of their own to limit the power of the best decks, like Metal Foes, Unchained, and Batlin' Boxers. People who play this format are incredibly passionate about it, and Konami has taken note. The second run of the event made changes to their own ban list that could only be made by keeping an eye on the fan version. How else would they know to limit Vendread cards? Now don't take this to mean that every fan-made format was successful or even good. The amount you have to walk over to get to a Trinity or NR-style format is immense. None so colossal in their failure as Yugioh. Created in 2015, Yugioh was set to be a way to start Yu-Gi-Oh! Fresh and get back to basics, using GOAT format's card pool and ban list as a way to slowly slide in new cards to get the format to something Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans would enjoy more. This had a lot of steam upon initial reveal, with the popular tournament organizers, ARG, even picking it up as an event. The problem was this was a horrible idea. GOAT format is like a bubble kid. It lives in a state of homeostasis that if even one foreign microbe is introduced to, will topple the whole thing. What cards were being added to the format? How about Raikou, Tour Guide, Wonder Wand, Horn of the Phantom Beast, and Acid Golem of Destruction? You get to start Yu-Gi-Oh! Over again, and you include Acid Golem? A card only used for evil? Yu-Gi-Oh! Died off in a matter of months once it was realized that it didn't have a solid enough idea of what it wanted to be to support its own fanbase. Other fan formats exist, but are usually much more casual, like Halloween format, where you can only play scary cards, or Duelist Kingdom format, where you can play using normal monsters and intuit their effects from the vanilla monster's flavor text. Game-exclusive types. I've talked a few times about the video games doing their own things independent of what the card game was doing, especially in games that don't exactly play like the card game. One place where this is displayed really well is with an innocuous part of the game, typing. A few different games have their own unique typings and attributes, with some of the most well-known examples being the immortal types from Duelist of the Roses. A collection of seemingly disparate monsters, immortal monsters have the ability to move on to crush panels, which function like Crush Card Virus and destroy weak monsters that move on to them. When I say the collection is largely disconnected, you have cards like Moisture Creature, Slate Warrior, Soul Eater. The main feature of immortal monsters is how slippery they are. The actual defining feature of the Immortals, though, is that all their card art doesn't show the full monster. For cards like Shape Snatch or Slate Warrior, yeah, I guess they would have arms, wouldn't they? But the real weird ones are in Servant of Catabolism or Soul Eater, where there's a whole other monster that I guess we were just supposed to know was there. Really, how were we supposed to know the fish wasn't the actual monster? The other two game-exclusive monster types come from Falsebound Kingdom, the Darklands and Spirit monsters. See, outside of these two, Falsebound only has 5 different monster types: warriors, spellcasters, dragons, machines, and beasts. Darklands and Spirits make up every other monster type in the game. Darklands are generally where your darker monsters go, like zombies and fiends. Spirit, meanwhile, not to be confused with actual spirit monsters, are everything else. Flame Cerberus, Insect Queen, and Giant Soldier of Stone all belong to the same monster type. Doesn't that seem a little messed up? Of course, casting this net out a bit further, and you also get game-exclusive attributes, with Capsule Monsters Coliseum, including the Core 6, as well as Divine, on top of Wood and Thunder. Thunder is made up of a big 3 monsters, including Sangha of the Thunder, Watkid, and apparently Trivia Magnet Summoned Skull. Wood has even less, with Gazelle the King of Mythical Beasts and Leprechaun being its sole reps. Of course, at this point, you might as well go over the manga-exclusive types too, like Gadget, used for Yugi's Gadget monsters, Yokai for Bastion's zombie monsters, Wild Beasts for Wolf and Wolf Alone, and the Invincibles, which seem to be a second zombie subclass for monsters that have been revived. Then there are the ones we didn't even get to see monsters for and were instead written out on a single page of Duelist Kingdom when describing how the field power bonus works, like Birdfolk and Knights. On top of those are the anime-exclusive ones, like plus and minus monsters, who existed for one duel for Bastion to use with his new line of Magnet Warriors, or the armor monsters used by Valen, who doubled as monsters and physical pieces of battle armor. People really want these cards, but I'm telling you right now, there's no way they can be adapted without being disappointing. There are even some types tied exclusively to the Bandai card game, like Electroid, Plantfolk, and Beast. Oh, damn, we haven't talked about that yet, have we? Bandai cards. Now, for almost all of Yu-Gi-Oh's existence, it's been a property handled by Konami. For good and for bad, they've shepherded the franchise for years. But in the early days, 2 other companies had managed to claim ownership, being Toei and Bandai. Now, Toei we've already talked about. They ended up making the Season 0 anime, as well as a few special OVAs. Bandai, meanwhile, would handle the physical rollout of the Yu-Gi-Oh card game. Okay, so it's not as simple as you'd hope, because there were no packs, and there were no rules. Duel Monsters, or Magic and Wizards as it was still known, didn't have a solid rule set written out yet. It was made up as it was played. To try to fix that, cards would have one of the 13 rules written on them to encourage kids to collect more to find out why they were collecting them. How the game of Duel Monsters would work was... You know that VTuber card game, V-Card? It's not that far off. You don't win by reducing life points, because you don't have any life points. Instead, you exhaust all the cards from both players' decks, which for some reason have to be the same size. And the player with the higher combined level of monsters in their graveyard at the end of the game loses. There are spells and traps, all the same color as the monster cards, and there are cards that are just anime characters, like Yugi, whose special ability is that he always wins, or Tristan's, whose special ability is that he always loses. The distribution of these cards was also pretty interesting, as instead of being released in traditional card packs, they were distributed through Bandai's proprietary card vending machines, the Card Ass. These would distribute a card at a time and were used for loads of different animes that Bandai was making products for, like Dragon Ball and Kinnikuman. Only this time they attempted to make an actual game out of them. The later expansions tried adding in new things like fusion monsters and multi-card monsters like Blue Eye's Ultimate Dragon and Exodia, but ultimately it was cancelled less than a year into production. Yu-Gi-Oh! Would keep a strong presence in pop culture thanks to the video games, and not soon after, the people making those video games would become the ones in charge, as Konami took over from Bandai. That leaves the Bandai cards as a real oddity for longtime fans to look back at, but I'd be lying if I said they didn't have their own charm to them. It feels a lot more like a game fans were supposed to make up their own rules for than a game that they really had an idea of what they wanted it to be. Now playing it? Hell no! But it's cute! Tristan's Nephew. You know how you phase out some children that just don't vibe with the rest of your children? The school arc of Yugioh was the time of experimentation. With the format of the story, the tone, it was when Takahashi truly set in stone what he wanted his vision to be. That also meant that during this time, he would try some things and introduce characters that would either dramatically change or be dropped altogether. Characters like Atem were toned down by a lot. Mokuba was totally reworked from his sadistic first outing, and Joey was perfect from the word go, so why change anything? But then you have those awkward characters to explain to newer fans, the ones who get left behind, like Miho Nosaka. The Toei anime set up Miho as the 5th member of the gang. Teia's best friend, Tristan's unrequited crush, just as important as anybody else. This conception, though, is largely formed from people who have only ever watched Season 0 rather than reading the original manga. In the manga, she's a one-and-done character. By the end of Chapter 7, she's never seen again. Miho's increased importance in the anime series was done to try to balance out the party a bit more. Instead of 3 guys and 1 girl, it would be 2 girls and 3 guys. She was kinda just another girl character, didn't have as much to make her distinct as Teiya, Tristan, or Joey did, so when she was phased out in the real series, nobody batted an eye. Retroactively, though, people have looked back on Miho's disappearance as a sort of launch in Dragon Ball situation. Important in the first entry in the series, and completely vanishes in the second. What a lot of people don't know, though, is that she didn't appear again because it would be like any one-chapter wonder accompanying the party for the rest of the series. Like, look out, I think Burger Shop owner is joining the team! His deck? You guessed it, Chronomaly. Now, if you actually want to talk about a character who just didn't work, I got a real answer for ya. How many of you knew that Tristan had a nephew? The Death Tea arc is a memorable one for a lot of reasons, but one dubious honor that it has was introducing Hiroto Joji, Tristan's nephew that he was looking after as a favor to his sister when the gang got trapped in the Death Park. Joji is a baby. A foul-mouthed, rude, lecherous, and overall unpleasant toddler, perving on Teiya and random nurses while solving issues like a game against Kaiba's butler by pooping on him. Joji is weird. I think his design and personality are meant to make him the comic relief of the arc, since it does get pretty heavy, but he's bad comic relief. He comes off more as annoying than anything, and after Death Tea would never make another appearance. I wouldn't be surprised at all to learn that his reception was a little frosty from readers. No way to know, of course, but I'd bet money on it. If you're sad about Bastion getting the shaft in GX, or Akiza getting the nickname Benchwarmer, just know it could be worse. Some characters' best panels are also their only ones. Yugioh R. Created in 2004, Yugioh R is a rarity among Yu-Gi-Oh mangas, as it's a spin-off. This is a whole new story set in the same canon as the original Duel Monsters story. Not after it, but during it. Yugioh R follows the adopted son of Pegasus, Yako Tenma. Since in the manga continuity, Pegasus is dead, Tenma believes that Yugi is the one who killed him, and so starts a war against him by kidnapping Teiya and forcing Yugi and co. to climb up the newly captured Kaiba Corp Tower to stop him. The ace in the hole for Tenma is the powers he was granted by Pegasus's long-lost creations, the Wicked Gods. God card analogs made in the image of each of the originals. Where there was the Winged Dragon of Ra, there's the Wicked Avatar. Obelisk the Tormentor has the Wicked Dreadroot, and Slifer has the Wicked Eraser. These powers extend to Resurrection, as among Tenma's ranks is Bandit Keith, who in the manga had his brains blown out during Duelist Kingdom. The manga was overseen by Kazuki Takahashi, but it's not illustrated or written by him. Instead, that job fell to an assistant of his, Akira Ito. If that name sounds at all familiar to you, it might be because alongside Satoshi Nakamura and Takaki Kadani, he created Card Fight Vanguard. Yeah, after working on the series, he nearly killed it. That's called planning ahead. While the story is kind of a mess, with about 15 new villains to share among 3 protagonists, the artwork is at an unbelievable level of quality. Takahashi's style is hard to imitate, but he does it flawlessly. Okay, maybe not flawlessly. For some reason, Ito misinterpreted the shading on Buster Blader's face to be lips. So now Buster Blader has full pouty lips that he uses to give big smooches to Busterwhelp. R is worth reading just to see the artwork, and also to see just how many cards come from it that you never realized. There's a theory among fans that certain cards don't see print for a long time because of Ito's involvement with Card Fight, but those people just don't know how much comes from R. Like, you know how Jack's Knight, King's Knight, and Queen's Knight all fuse into Arcana Knight Joker in Yugi's duel with Kaiba to parallel his XYZ Dragon Cannon? Of course you don't, that never happened. Arcana Knight Joker is an R original card. Same with Beast King Barbaros, Gorz the Emissary of Darkness, Summoner Monk. The duels themselves can range in quality, a lot of forgettable fluff, but there are still a lot of ones that stand out. Like Joey facing a lockdown deck and winning by saying, "Chase Strats, no balls!" Joey also gets to bury the hatchet with Bandit Keith now that he's back, and Yugi gets an over 150-page duel at the end with Tenma. It's an interesting corner of the series, and if you're already going back to read the Duel Monsters manga, might as well take a pit stop for these 5 volumes. Unfinished Dubs. Yu-Gi-Oh! GX is a fan-favorite season of Yu-Gi-Oh! The setting is exciting. The cast is memorable, fun, and dynamic. The duels start to reflect the real game a little more, and its themes are interesting and pointed. The show is all about growing up and discovering what your passions really are, and how to deal with yourself when losing the spark for something that brought you joy. Is it worth fighting to get it back, or is it better to move on? A lot of the deeper exploration of the characters comes around in Season 4, the final season of the show, where the embodiment of despair, Darkness, returns and tries to plunge the world into, well, himself. To people who have only seen the dub, though, you might be a bit confused, because the show actually ends with Jaden and Yubel going into space, I think, and then the show's over. Well, that's because, infamously, GX and 5Ds both stop short and don't adapt the full series before moving on to the next one. It's even worse in 5D's case, since at least the ending with Yubel could be misinterpreted as a satisfying ending. 5D's has so many hanging plot threads left since they end the show on the episode before the final arc begins. At least GX has a little time skip. Fans have begged for a proper conclusion to these dubs for years, but that's never going to happen. So why were the dubs never finished? Well, frankly, the answer is simple. 4Kids ran out of time. The release schedule of the anime in Japan versus other regions was normally about 2 years. The original anime started airing in Japan on April 18th, 2000, while in America it started on September 29th, 2001. Japan had ended the original series on September 29th, 2004, while America wouldn't finish up until 2006. By then, GX was about halfway over in Japan, and 4Kids was in the middle of some major catch-up. GX ends in 2008, and 5D's debuts in the same year. Literally the next week, April 2008. 4Kids wouldn't dub the final episode of GX until July 2008. Meaning they were in big trouble. See, while the anime releases were out of sync, the card game releases were. So the final pack of the GX era, Light of Destruction, was released in May of 2008, meaning that by the release of the next pack, the Duelist Genesis, the card packs in anime would be out of sync. You'd be collecting Stardust Dragons and Red Dragon Archfiends, while Jaden was still bumming it with hero cards. Cards that weren't even in packs anymore. In order to keep the packs and shows in sync, they simply decided to forego the release of Season 4 and move directly into 5Ds on September 13th, 2008, only 11 days after the release of Duelist Genesis. The same thing happened years later with 5Ds. The show ends on March 30th, 2011, and by that point, the dub was still a few months out from finishing the Grand Prix arc. Even after trimming out 2 mini-arcs, they only just managed to get the new dub out in October, when the Xyz era began in August. After this, the product and anime finally got in sync, as Zexal became the first of the sequel series to get a proper conclusion. And even though the Vrains dub was delayed to hell and back, that one got the luxury of no following anime, meaning they were free to take all the time they wanted. The Uncut Dubs. Being a Yugioh player is finding out how much everybody in the community is sick of the only jokes non-Yu-Gi-Oh fans know. You'll hear children's card game in a whole new light when you finally lab out a Fiendsmith combo. What the hell are they teaching kids in schools that this is what they do for fun? I think it's more of a cultural thing that some people have trouble realizing when a joke gets old. Like, wow, I didn't know Goku was a bad dad. How'd you think of that? A prime one for me is for kid censorship. If you have a clever way to do it, more power to you. But I swear, just throwing in rice ball jelly donuts or invisible gun jokes is so played out. Get new material! Imagine how much different things would be if instead of that, we'd gotten these as the very first dub of Yu-Gi-Oh! Released in 2004, Yu-Gi-Oh! Uncut was a collaborative release between 4Kids and Funimation, which gives you a one-for-one, unedited, uncensored, and uncut version of Yu-Gi-Oh!, the original Japanese versions, into English. Instead of aggressive pointing, Kaiba's being held at gunpoint. Instead of Exodia Obliterate, it's Hellfire's Rage, Exodo Flame. The music, card names, card text, on-screen graphics, it's all a direct translation of the Japanese version. This was an exclusive release to home videos, done alongside uncut releases of Shaman King, for the growing group of fans who wanted an authentic translation rather than localization. This features all the same actors as the currently ongoing dub, including those who had been recast, and now they'd had years more experience and sounded fantastic. Hearing certain scenes redone like this is a surreal feeling. You can really tell that in the time between the original dub and now, they've gotten so much more comfortable.
Ha! Did you finally lose hope and decide to pull any card?
Not quite. I have my hope right here in my hand. The card I pulled is Exodia, the Forbidden One.
What the?
Hellfire's Rage, Exodo Flame!
I think that if it was done this well, it could be perfect. Except it's not. See, we're about to get a lesson on why direct translations stink, and why localization is a required part of the process. The script is no exaggeration, just a direct word-for-word translation from the Japanese version. Except, the Japanese version is worded oddly to an American speaker. Lines like Joey's speech before his duel with Mai come off like Joey suddenly reciting a grade school play from memory. It's not always this bad, but when it's bad, oh, it's rotten. Also, for some reason, they kept all the dub first names. As in, it isn't Joey Wheeler or Katsuya Jonoichi, it's Katsuya Joey. Instead of adjusting the dub to properly fit American speech patterns, the dub comes off as alien, as this overly romantic speaking that might sound normal in a different language is thrown like a brick through a window. There are scenes that I think work well, and the talent is still really good at their jobs, but this is why direct translations always fall flat. There's a beauty in adaptation. The uncut DVDs would be released for 3 volumes of 3 episodes each. And while a 4th was planned, and even got a trailer, it would never be released, after a series of behind-the-scenes issues that never got properly explained. The uncut DVDs of Yu-Gi-Oh! And Shaman King were successful according to then 4Kids CEO Alfred Kahn, but later emails to 4Kids employees called them failures. Funimation employees called it a rights dispute with the Japanese branch, which sounds insane since they're working together, but then you remember Nihon Ad Systems took down Japanese uploads of Yu-Gi-Oh! Videos off the 4Kids YouTube page, and I guess it's not unbelievable. Nowadays they exist as an oddity of the dubbing history of Yu-Gi-Oh! And if you're one of those lost media perverts, you can try to get to work on finding the fourth unreleased DVD. The Odex Dub. On the topic of bizarre English dubs and the tumultuous times that made them, welcome Singapore! Population of over 5 million, home to 2016 Olympic gold medalist in men's 100-meter butterfly swimming, Joseph Schooling, and site of an infamous dub of Yu-Gi-Oh! That still gets talked about today. See, Singapore, despite being in Asia, has a predominantly English-speaking society, with it being the language used in branches like education and the government. So instead of airing Yu-Gi-Oh! In one of the other languages, like Malay, Mandarin, or Tamil, they would air the English dub. Thing is, though, that airing a dub isn't as simple as just getting the rights. No, not only will you have to get the permission and pay the rights holders to air the show, but you'll also have to pay an equally hefty fine to the producers of that dub to get the rights to air that version. After getting the rights to air Yu-Gi-Oh! In Singapore, the distributors didn't want to go through the trouble of paying 4Kids as well, and decided to instead dub it themselves to save on money. This is a practice that's much more common than you'd think. The same thing happened when Bang Zoom was commissioned to make a dub of Dragon Ball Super to air in English-speaking Asian countries. You might have seen the incredibly mean-spirited Totally Not Mark video about it. And then the follow-up, where one of the dub actors, Lex Lang, explains the circumstances behind the dub, and then he just keeps on shitting on it. I like Mark, I just don't know why he did that. This dub would be handled by the company Odex, who also would do dubs for projects like Case Closed and One Piece in the same region, directed by the various actors who would star in the show, like Chuck Powers, Kristen J. Lee, and Brian Zimmerman. The series would cover about the first 90 episodes of the series, and like the previous Uncut Dub, preserves loads of the original version's assets, like music, on-screen text, intros, and outros. The dub itself isn't very high quality, since it's likely the dub was initially made to avoid paying more money. This one is done like the actors are being paid by the second, and there's a guy with a stopwatch and gun in the corner of the room timing them to get out. The most questionable dub change comes from how Atem is voiced. It's a very odd choice to not change his voice between the two forms, but any sort of authority or coolness that Atem had is replaced with skater lingo and a casual way of speaking that doesn't match him at all.
What's up, Yugi? You look really good today. Thanks, but I'm going out with Tia today, so I want to look good. Wow, you're on a date? Way to go, Yugi! Man, I'm really proud of you for this. Well, actually, this isn't for me.
The dub just stops in the middle of the Battle City finals, so if you want to not enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh! As much, feel free to check out the whole thing on the Internet Archive. The Yu-Gi-Oh! Females List. Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game of so it is not against the law to, we put all the female monsters in a list. This is gonna sound really bad before it gets to being bad, so just follow along. So early Yu-Gi-Oh's rule set, we're talking Duelist Kingdom manga rules, was Calvin Ball. There were no rules. There were game pieces, but f*** you if you think we're gonna tell you how to use them. This loose rule set led to a load of Duelist Kingdom bullshit that we all know and love. We're talking Attack in the Moon, Flotation Rings, and the subject we're talking about, Shadow of Eyes. This card was used by winner of One On-Screen Duel, My Valentine, during her duel with Yugi, and the card's effect is to switch defense position monsters to attack. How it works flavor-wise, though, is by using pheromones to attract male monsters into attack mode when you control a female monster. If he had known what destruction he'd have wrought by writing this, Kazuki Takahashi would have shit. As the early video games would be released alongside the original manga, they followed a similar logic, and cards like Electro Whip, Cyber Shield, and Malevolent Nuzzler could only be equipped to female monsters. The final mentioning of monsters' sexes as a gameplay feature is from Zexal, in Chapter 18's duel against Princess Cologne. She summons number 22 Zombie-Stein, a massive monster with 4,500 attack that threatens to completely destroy Yuma, except he tries attacking Gaga Girl. Zombie-Stein stops the attack, and it's revealed that in his effect text, it says he's incapable of destroying female monsters. Zombie-Stein tries proposing to Gaga Girl, who calls him ugly and ultimately loses Cologne the duel. I'd have burned the card if this was me. These are all weird little relics of the Wild West days of the franchise. Funny quirks that should be forgotten because they affect a pool of cards that's about 5 deep, and none of them are real. I know, for his printing, Zombie-Stein underwent reverse sensitivity training and can fight anybody now. It's decided that in case any card that was printed with these effects should actually be printed, there should be a continuously running list cataloging every single card that had a female-presenting monster on the artwork. That phrasing isn't me trying to be overly cautious. I mean, here are the criteria for getting onto the female monsters list. You must have female secondary sex characteristics, the fat tits, have a feminine name, be overtly referred to as female in related card lore, have a female voice in the anime, or just not look male enough in the case of Djinn, Lightsworn Paladin. Now, something you'll notice off the bat is that this doesn't matter and is extremely strange. There really is no reason to maintain a list like this for anything but cards that it affects, namely the monsters that are treated as female in games like Dark Duel Stories and Duelist of the Roses. Those lists actually have a reason to exist, because on a tiny Game Boy screen, you might not be able to recognize if two cards work together. Why any list exists beyond this is completely ridiculous and serves as a great thing to point at and say, I don't want to get into Yugioh. It is good for one thing, though, finding out what the sick, twisted individuals who made this list consider to be female, like manipulator tokens. Wanna know why? In the anime, when they're used, it copies Rio Castell's hair. Oh, so it must be a female doll then. There's Eater of Millions, which isn't female because the monster on the card is female, but because on the card is the card art for Esper Girl, making this card female. DDD Oracle King D'Arc is a female because it passes the mammogram test, but fails the female title portion, since they're a king. The only explanation is that all DDD monsters are trans. Gen X Spare is a female, and this is a spare version of Gen X Controller. And since Gen X Controller is the monster needed to make all the other Gen X monsters, that means every Gen X monster is female. You want your waifu bait deck? Here it is! If Controller is male, that would make Repaired Controller intersex. Yu-Gi-Oh fans will forever be known as weird dorks and as a sword that we fall on by our own hand. Kazuki Takahashi's other mangas. No author is ever just their most popular work. Every Dragon Ball has its Dr. Slumps and Galactic Patrolman Jackos. Every Kaniku Man has its Scrap Sandeos and Lionhearts. Kazuki Takahashi is no different. Yu-Gi-Oh is far from the only manga he's ever worked on, and the variety of what he actually has is vast. There's his early work from when he went under Hajime Miyabi, which includes a lot of licensed manga, like Go Kyu Choji Ikamon. A running theme, though, with a lot of Takahashi's manga from before he went under his most famous name is that they haven't been preserved properly. And maybe they're available somewhere, but not anywhere that's easy to find, and even less likely translated into English. This includes Ing Love Ball, Tokyo no Taka, Battle Mind, and Tenin Shoko Danji Bure all being pretty much impossible to find. However, he does have 3 much more modern manga, made after Yu-Gi-Oh's boom, that all have something interesting to say. The first is Drump, a one-shot made by Takahashi in 2013, and is again about card games. This one sees a young boy named Rasso accidentally unsealing a dragon that had been trapped for centuries, and having his eye replaced with the dragon's to allow him to see into the past. The evil witch who tries sealing up the dragon ends up thwarted because of Rasso, who then has to play the witch in a game of Drump to send her back. I'm not a huge fan of the actual plot. It feels a little bit too much like a remix of Yu-Gi-Oh! Than its own proper story. But it still is an interesting read, if for nothing else than to see how much Takahashi's art has remained consistently fantastic. His next manga, the comic, is a super different one from his previous works, as it taps into the horror influences that helped create Yugioh, a murder mystery following a manga artist and his background artist, who's doing backgrounds as a prison reform program. Damn, Takahashi, tell us how you really feel about drawing backgrounds. It's not even fit to be prison labor. It turns out the background artist Baba was framed for a murder years ago, and is using his work to try to communicate to the artist Ryota that he's innocent. Ryota ends up dragged into a decades-old cold case as he works to prove his co-worker's innocence. The manga isn't just a departure in terms of subject, but art style, with the influence being less based in comic books and more in old adventure serials like Tintin, with how the eyes are drawn. It gives everything a much softer feel that really leaves me wanting to read it more. Going back to the superhero inspiration and going whole hog into it is Marvel's Secret Reverse, a part of a line of various mangas made for Marvel by various mangakas. Kazuki Takahashi was chosen to be a part of this lineup, and I can only imagine what an honor it was. His love for heroes in everything from the Zombira section of the original School arc to the biggest archetype in the game is palpable, and working with Marvel must have been a bucket list item. The story that came from it? Take it or leave it. It's an Iron Man and Spider-Man crossover with a card-themed villain, chocked full of plenty of callbacks to Yu-Gi-Oh! Takahashi's art style is pushed in new directions with a more mechanical look that he gets pretty right, but this was 2019. Takahashi's modern art style lent to some odd-looking faces every once in a while. Obviously, Takahashi will forever be known best for Yu-Gi-Oh! But as a fan of his work, you owe it to yourself to at least check out the full breadth of the man's work. Will Arnett. Will Arnett has said the words Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds.
Coming up next, it's an all-new Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds on Cartoon Network.